Hey Pokemon fans, Real Mommy Eagle here, also known as Key, and today I'm here to rank all the Pokemon generations from easiest to hardest. The opinions in this video are my own based off my experiences and how I felt about the game's difficulties. Keep in mind as I'm doing these rankings, I am judging games by their original counterpart and no remakes will be included in this list. Before we get into this list, don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know below how you would rank the Pokemon generations. Now let's get started. Number 9, Generation 6. Now, Generation 6 is definitely a great generation in its own right, giving us really great quality of life changes to the series, but Generation 6 was the easiest generation ever, at least to me. Generation 6 really presented no real challenges as most gym leaders were pretty easy to navigate, and to be perfectly honest, the game made it easier for you to progress if you did have the experience share turned on. Not to mention, Pokemon in the wild gave you pretty decent experience. But the Elite Four was also very forgettable, and what really made me annoyed with the Elite Four is that every member of the Elite Four only had 4 Pokemon, and the Pokemon they had were pretty one-dimensional, and you could pretty much one-shot them with 1 or 2 Pokemon. Champion Dianthia wasn't really much of a challenge either, pretty disappointing. But overall, this generation, when you look at Pokemon battles and overall difficulty, definitely falls at the bottom. Number 8. Generation 8. Generation 8 would actually be easier than Generation 6 if not for the DLC and some gym battles that rose above the gym leaders in Generation 6, but it does get the edge. Having said that, it's still a pretty easy generation. If you take away the DLC, there's really not a ton of challenge in gym battles unless you pick the wrong typing. I know when I first played, I struggled a bit with Nessa because I was under-leveled, but I didn't really walk around a lot and battle Pokemon. This game unfortunately sets you up to succeed because there's force experience share that you can't turn off, and the only really tough battles you may see in this game are the late B battle, the battle with Chairman Rose, and possibly Raihan or even Leon depending on what Pokemon you chose. But ultimately, it's a Pokemon game that's pretty easy to get through with not a ton of challenges and very easy to get the type advantage leg up on your opposition. Number 7. Generation 9. Now, I do want to preface by saying I adore Gen 9 and everything it gave to us. It's a great generation with great replay value, but it is still one of the easiest generations that we've gotten. Now, the game pretty much holds your hand in the sense that you have the force experience share, so it's pretty hard to really be under-leveled unless you're just not battling at all. If that's the case, you may go to some areas where you're pretty much going to find a challenge, but outside of the last Arvin battle, the last Nimona battle, and the one hideout that was fighting type, I really didn't find this generation very challenging. What makes this gen lower on the list is a very underwhelming Elite Four and a champion that is arguably the easiest in all the Pokemon games. Number 6. Generation 7. Generation 7 is controversial because it depends on what version you're playing that really determines its difficulty. Now, if you're playing Sun and Moon, the only time you're really challenged is with the Luzamine battles and the Guzman battle, maybe a few Aether Foundation battles, and then Professor, depending on what Pokemon you chose. But Ultra Sun and Moon is really what brings out the difficulty and makes us rise above previous generations on this list because of that Ultra Necrozema battle, Luzamine again, and of course you have the Delta episode with all the bosses of the other criminal teams, so that definitely ups the ante a bit as far as difficulty. Sun and Moon otherwise has pretty relatively easy trials through both versions, which don't really take a ton to beat, and then on top of that, you kind of have the Kahunas that are somewhat challenging but not really big deal. So this generation is a good gen, but as far as difficulty, not really that difficult. Number 5, Generation 2. I know people are probably looking at me like, Key, but Whitney, Claire, etc. Now, those are 2 difficult gym battles, but I would say outside those 2, I didn't really feel super challenged in gym battles. I also thought most of the trainers in Johto were actually relatively weak and very much underleveled. Now, don't get me wrong, the reason that Gen 2 is a little bit higher than previous gens is because when you go back to Kanto and battle the gym leaders, you do get challenged, and of course, we know the final battle obviously adds to the main challenge. But Gen 2 as a whole has an Elite Four that's not super challenging. There's a few tough trainers like Karen, but Lance is ultimately very one-dimensional and easier to beat than a lot of people think. And again, rival battle at the end, somewhat difficult but not super hard. Gen 2 still has decent difficulty, but not the highest difficulty. Number 4, Generation 3. Generation 3 definitely deserves to be near the top of this list because there's a good balance with difficulty. I definitely felt some challenge with the team Aqua and Magma interns, and even some of the admins at the end of the game, which gave you a bit of a challenge. The gym leaders definitely from top to bottom did range decent difficulty. When you talk about guys like Norman, even Wallace, they all presented some sort of a challenge for the most part. I also do like the fact that you have a very talented and tough Elite Four. Drake still gives me nightmares. When I was a kid, he wrecked me. Glacia is definitely no slouch, and then you have Steven Stone, who's a pretty darn good champion. Trainer battles late in the game are also pretty challenging as well. You definitely will run into those ace trainers that really give you a lot to put up with. Legendary battles also a tough task as well. Gen 3 has still aged very well in terms of difficulty. Number 3, Generation 1. The original Generation 1 is still pretty good in difficulty because you had 3 types in Psychic, Ghost, and Dragon, where you didn't really have a ton of answers to beat them, therefore were almost deemed OP because of the lack of answers, which made the Sabrina battle very tough, Ghost battles very tough, and obviously Dragon battles with Lance pretty tough unless you had a lot of ice. This generation also did boast a pretty tough Elite Four except for Bruno. Bruno sucks. But the Elite Four was pretty challenging unless you were pretty overleveled, and the final battle with Champion Gary was also a very tall task, but a good one. You did face pretty challenging trainers, and what made Gen 1 very difficult, it was just very hard to grind in. You couldn't even see the experience bar. You had to check the menu. It was that bad. And you also didn't get a lot of experience points from Pokemon. Gen 1 is still a very fun challenge if you want that. Number 2, Generation 5. Generation 5 to me is still the last difficult generation that we really had as far as ramping up and there being a true challenge. Gym leaders definitely gave you a challenge, whether it was Black and White 2, because all had moves that would trap you in battles, or they just knew how to use their abilities very well. But you definitely got out-tricked and outsmarted in times by some of those gym leaders. You also had some really tough trainer battles, rival battles late in the game, but the really magic as far as difficulty was the end battle, the Getsus battles, and even the Team Plasma Sages all definitely gave you a run for your money. Black and White 2 ramped up things a lot more with the Pokemon World Tournament, giving you an extra layer of difficulty to do in your spare time. But the gyms to me were even tougher in Black and White 2 with a bit of a twist. But Black and White 2 and Black and White make for a very, very good challenge. And when you throw challenge mode into the mix, even better. Number 1, Generation 4. Obviously, I'm talking about the original, not the remake, but the original Generation 4 was definitely difficult. If you think about the original Diamond and Pearl, it was probably the hardest game to grind in besides Gen 1 because you had that very slow moving experience bar and the very slow engine. So leveling up and grinding in the original Diamond and Pearl took forever, but you had very tough trainer battles. You had a tougher selection of Pokemon, which means you had to strategize a lot more in this generation. Good trainer battles, good gym battles that gave you a legit challenge, and arguably, well, actually, is there an argument, the toughest champion in Cynthia to date. So that makes Gen 4 the most difficult generation. How did you feel about how I ranked the gens via difficulty? Let me know how you would rank them in the comments below. Let's have a fun discussion about it because everyone's opinion is different. While you're down there commenting, don't forget to like and subscribe as well, and ding that bell so you know when videos are up. I am Real Mommy Eagle on all social media platforms, and I do live streams at twitch.tv/RealMommyEagle. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.